Hello and welcome to the live Printing Impressions webinar, Reducing Steps and Increasing Productivity with Rotary Die Cutting, sponsored today by MBO America. I'm Patrick Henry, Senior Editor for NAPCO Media's Printing and Packaging Group and the moderator of today's event. Before we get started, let me take a moment to point out the Tips for Attendees widget on your console. It's the blue one with the wrench on it. If you missed seeing the Tech Tips video we played leading up to the webinar, you can always click this widget for more information. And please do be sure to use the Q&A button in the bar on the bottom to send us your questions at any point during the webinar. To begin today's conversation about achieving high productivity in post-press, I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. First, we have Bob Maurer, Production Systems Manager, the Zenger Group. Bob is an industry veteran who specializes in expanding and streamlining print manufacturing operations. Since 2014, Bob has been with the Zenger Group of Tonawanda, New York, where he focuses on implementing lean practices and efficient workflows. Lance Martin, Vice President of Sales, National Accounts, MBO America. Lance has more than 30 years of experience in the printing industry, including stints with R.R. Donnelley, Goss International, and Western Printing Machinery. As head of sales at MBO America, he is responsible for national accounts and marketing, and he regularly participates in industry events nationwide, including webinars like this one for Printing Impressions and its sister publications. Now, Bob and Lance are going to have a lot to say this afternoon about boosting efficiency and productivity in die cutting, a post-press step that takes place in many different forms of commercial and packaging printing. But before I turn the program over to them, I want to say a brief word about why it's become so crucial for printers to adopt the kinds of best practices that they'll be talking about. And it's simply because customers, your customers, are insisting on the fastest and most cost-efficient service you can give them. NAPCO Research, the market research arm of NAPCO Media, investigates trends in demand in the commercial, implant, and packaging segments of the industry. The data you see here, taken from a NAPCO research report titled The Impact of Customer Buying Preferences on the Commercial Printing Industry, show that nearly 3/4 of the printers that we surveyed are dealing with increased demands for faster turnarounds. And nearly as many told us that they're also seeing stepped up demand for delivery in smaller quantities. Now, if we drill a bit more deeply into turnarounds, we're going to see from the graph on the right that better than half of our respondents are expected to print, finish, and ship in 3 days or less. And as you can see, significant percentages told us that they are working on even tighter schedules than that. And it's the same story among marketers, the people who primarily influence the buying of print. NAPCO Research has found that when marketing professionals spend on print, the majority of them want their printing exactly when they want it, which is to say at the speed of now. So the questions for print service providers become, do we have technology in place that will enable our operations to keep pace with these demands? Do we know where and how to measure the efficiency of our production so that we can find ways to improve it? That's what our program today is all about. Lance, can you please get us started?
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Thank you all out there for joining. These webinars are truly a great educational experience. We really enjoy putting them on, and thank you, NAPCO and everybody. They tend to have a very good attendance, and we really do appreciate it. I think we have a very interesting one for you today. It's something a little out of the ordinary for MBO by most people's standards, and I think I'd like to start the discussion with that. We are going to be talking about rotary die cutting today, and to start this off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about MBO America just to refresh everybody. You will find that people are not necessarily associating MBO with die cutting and some of the other things we do. So I'm going to give you a little overview of the group real quick, and then we'll have Bob jump in, and we'll really dive deep into their application. I think it'll be very interesting for people. They'll have some opportunity to see some real numbers and some real business applications that worked. So first I'll start off with who is the MBO Group. We are a conglomeration of many finishing solutions. The MBO Group is a privately held business out of Germany, and you'll see over on the left side of this slide that we are MBO America is the division here in North America. We're centered out of New Jersey area. It's actually right in it's a suburb of Philly. And we're approximately 40% of the business, anywhere from 35 to 45, depending upon the makeup of the year. And we're a full support for both legacy and new equipment, sales, service, parts, testing, inventory, showroom, and so on. And we have our own technical advisors over here for our market. And you'll find that our business model is quite different than what people normally think of MBO for, which is a folding machine manufacturer. And that's classically what happens is people hear MBO and they go, yeah, you guys make folders. And although that is true, the makeup of the business is quite a bit different. The rest of the company is actually made up from groups such as Herzog & Hyman, which is an MBO brand, and many of you know them for their specialty applications in direct mail and packaging, and most well known for pharmaceutical. We call them folding up chiclets, but it's taking large sheets of paper that are on very light stock many times and folding them with high numbers of buckle plates to very small products that go inside pharmaceutical packaging. The MBO Germany group is out of Oppenweiler, and our Portugal group is our manufacturing facility. It's approximately 250,000 square feet in Porto, Portugal, and we ship everything out of there, and that makes all of our parts, both internal and external, parts manufacturing for all of our divisions, plus some other customers ourselves. And then this last section you'll see where we have put on quite a few more partnerships to be able to do larger projects. And I think today you'll see some of that where we've put multiple processes together to get the best efficiency we can. So I'm going to go very quickly over some of these things and just give people an overview so we can get to the meat quickly. But here you'll see some of the milestones. We added die cutting to our portfolio back in 2007. The H&H specialty group was actually merged into us in 2000. And we brought up the web business in 2008. And then we continue on with innovation and partnerships all through now and continuing on into 19. We really do internally talk about the why, how, and what. Why is mostly because we really believe in the printing industry, and we truly believe that finishing is where it begins. We know that it's really hard to sell a flat sheet that hasn't been finished into something usable, and likewise it's doubly hard to sell a roll that hasn't been processed. And we did it by using all of our divisions' know-how to come up with a modular, flexible, durable, and very customizable type of a product model. And you'll see that in all of our literature now is we go by customized productivity. We don't make custom machinery, however we do customize the machinery configurations with modules that do certain steps of the process. So many MBO solutions can be similar in nature with modules but arranged differently to come out with a different output. And you'll see that today when we get down to putting together the solution for Zenger. MBO America, what we see in the American market right now is this convergence of the digital world and the commercial world, and it's really what Pat was saying earlier. The influence is moving a shorter turnaround, higher quality expectation, variable data many times, and so on and so on and so on. And it's merging in with the commercial print market, and that's where we were very successful changing our business model all the way back in the early 2000s to meet this demand that we knew was coming, and now we truly see these markets starting to merge together. And the digital finishing business, both web and cut sheet, is merging a lot into the commercial business. And then die cutting is right on its tails. And we actually see that shape of the business is really strong. And then this lower part, the pharma and specialty, we see that coming on quite strong too. After a little bit of a pause in the early teens, it is really quite a market now too. So we're very positive and bullish on the American market right now, and having successful years in all these different categories. What we're going to be talking about today is rotary die cutting and its influence on the market. Traditional die cutting using clamshell presses and high dies and large flatbed cutters is the legacy part of our industry. It's been around for a long time, and many times we see the issues with that machinery being long setup times. A lot of times you're using short runs on machines that were really designed for long runs, or at least medium at best. And running short runs for them would be long runs for many of the markets that we see in volume right now. And what we have offered to the market is a rotary die cutting solution that solves many of these problems. So we'll find that the rotary die cutter has the ability to have short turnaround times on step up. It has a low cost of tooling. It's very controllable. The tooling is incredibly accurate and does not require much setup. You basically can hang it and go. And we are seeing make-ready times on rotary die cutting to be in the half an hour to an hour for a full job change, and even less on repeatable jobs. Whereas compared to a full-size flatbed die cutter, we can see times into the 2, 4, 6 hours depending upon how it's going. And even clamshells are striking and shimming die plates to get them to cut cleanly, and then you still have issues with speed on some of the smaller machines. And furthermore, what we see, the rotary die cutting does not require any nicks or any edge pattern to hold it together to get the matrix to come out of the machine, and whereas the older machines do. And that is a great option for point-of-purchase type things that are happening and show on the shelf and so on. You have a perfectly clean edge. So all those put together, rotary die cutting is making a push, and now we're able to serve also this anywhere from the 13, 19 sheet size, which is very common in the digital market, and you'll see that today. That's Zenger's platform. And then we can also push that all the way up to the B2 sizes that would catch some of the newer presses like the HP 12,000 and maybe the Canon and the Konica Minolta machines for the 23 by 29 oversized B2. So it's a very versatile product that can also be modular within a system. The process of rotary die cutting is a much simpler type of a process. To set it up, it's more you set the feeder sizes, you mount the die plates. There is no striking and shimming to a rotary die, and then you align the stripper shoes, and you can begin your run. So the make-readies on these things are 10 to 20 minutes for a repeat job that you've run before. The same die plates can go back on the machine, and sometimes for a first rubbering up type of a job and a brand new that you've not run before, you can still be an hour or less on setup of dies and feeders and stripping. And it is key that the stripping is internal and integral to the process. So you end up with a final finished clean cut product with no grinding that comes out of the machine, which is usually quite a bit different than most of the flatbed processes that sometimes require some post die cutting stripping to get the product onto the skid or onto the conveyor cleanly. And we also see, as you see in line 8, we don't see it having to be just a short run machine. And you'll see today there's a lot of volume coming out from the machine. We can run up to 12,000 sheets an hour in maximum speeds, and normally we're seeing these machines with these products in the 5,000 to 9,000 range. You're going to see today Zenger is right in the middle of that and doing well, and we would kind of call that a medium volume run. So we can get short and medium. And we've also, because of the way that sets up, it's taken out the art form of it a little bit. You have less of a complicated setup, and that is serving up to our labor market of today, which is, of course, as we all know, is getting a little bit less and less every day. These are the subject of this case study today. It's a CR80 card. That's a classic card, 2 1/8 by 3 3/8 with an 1/8 inch radius, and we'll show you today how that was streamlined in the process to be a much shorter turnaround time, and no nicks, ready to present. And I think I'm going to get ready to turn it over to Bob.
Lance, thank you so much for that overview of MBO and the solutions it provides. Before we give it to Bob, I would like to remind the audience that we're very eager to get your questions. We have one good one in there already, and certainly would like to see more. We will have some time toward the end of the presentation to get to your specific issues. Bob, let's now find out how you're using some of the technology that Lance is talking about to such good advantage at the Zenger Group. Please go ahead.
Okay, first I want to say thanks to Lance and Pat, as well as thanks to everyone for joining the webinar today. A little bit of overview of the Zenger Group. Our headquarters are located here in Tonawanda, New York, which is about 15 minutes north of Buffalo. We specialize in our intelligent mailing. What we do here is a lot of camera matching capabilities, lookup print, direct mail functions where we do a lasered letter with 2D OCR reading and do match back to where we can print any sort of information you want on the outer envelope. We've been a force in the printing industry now for over 25 years, one of Western New York's leading print and direct mail services. This job that we do, that we use the MBO Bograma for, is our card production line. We do approximately 30 to 35 million cards a month for one of our customers. Right now, our current process is we do an offset shell model, which is on a 25 by 38 sheet. As you can see, we print them 100 up, the static color. We then take them over to our cutter and cut them down into quarters. So we basically have 4 sections of 25 up, 12 1/2, 19 sheets. Our original process that we used to use was those 25 up sheets would go to 3 separate iGen machines, where we would then imprint the variable information onto each one of those sheets. We integrated those with UV coaters on the back end to then seal in the toner, because we found out was the toner was simply just rubbing off. So we had some sort of a protection for that variable information so that the end user would not lose that information in the lifetime of the card. After they were variably numbered and coded, they would then go to a guillotine cutter, where we would have cutter operators simply just cut them down to singles. After they were cut to singles, then they would go to our 2 high die presses that would press them through the CR80 high-rise dies and put the round corner and the clean edges on them. It was a lot of work. There was a lot of moving parts to it, and it just seemed to be, it got the job done, but it also it was a huge effort just to get that job done. Oh, my slide's not pushing here. There we go. Our new model now, which we considered as phase 1, is we use an inkjet, 3-headed inkjet base that's designed by the Phoenix. It's on a Kirk-Rudy inkjet base. We use the same 12 1/2 inch by 19 inch sheets that we were before. It's printed out of the same 100 up original formation. We now replace those. We replace that with we replace the iGens and the UV coaters with that inkjet. So now we no need to spend the money for the UV coating to go on top of it, the slow speed of the iGens. We took it right through that, and we were going directly into a bidirectional slitter, a roll-em slitter. We would slit in one direction, cut in the second direction, and it would cut it down to single. So it also took out the guillotine cutting at the end. We were averaging about 5,000 sheets per hour, and that was on a good day. The bottleneck to this whole operation was the slitter. We could not run the slitter any faster. We can inkjet much faster, but we could not slit any faster. So after it was printed and run through the slitter, we would then take those cards back to the high-rise die cutter and simply push those through again. Our new model that we came up with is we searched all over the country looking for the right application and found that with MBO, with the Bograma Rotary Diecutter, that was the best fit. What we did is we keep the same formation, the same layout for everything. We use the same feeder and the same inkjet now, because that wasn't our bottleneck, and we feed the same 12.5 by 19-inch sheet through, 25 up layout, and it feeds directly into the rotary die cutter. Now, there was a little bit of design with the machinery and the layout that we had to integrate the feeder through the inkjet base into the die cutter so that it was timed properly, because it cannot be just simply send a sheet whenever you want. It has to be lined up precisely with the servo of the cylinder going around. We can do this in either orientation. However, our programming and design allows us to do it right now as landscape. We can rotate the sheet. However, we can't print that way because our inkjet head is only 12.5 inches wide. So we still do it 12.5 by 25 the long way. We can lengthen the sheet out to 28 inches, but due to customers' request, we've left it as is. The labor to run this machine right now, we have one operator. We have two people catching cards off the end and shingling them into stacks, and then they go onto a separate small conveyor that goes to two people banding them with a clear banding around each pack. You'll see here, this is an overview layout of the machine. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that is our in-house sheet feeder that feeds the 12.5 by 19 sheets over top of the Kirk Rudy 519 inkjet base, which then feeds into the ULT 550 bridge transfer table from Bograma, into the BSR 550 servo die cutter, through the stream spreader device, the ULT, and then onto a simple short line shingle conveyor. Now, Lance, did you want to say something about this layout? Okay, I'll move on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'll go back to it if you'd like.
No, go ahead. I forgot I was on mute. I apologize. Thanks, Sherry.
That's okay.
Yeah, in the middle of the layout, you'll see the bridge unit, and one of the things you could do to keep the line flexible, if you had other work to do in another application, it's possible to pull the bridge unit out and use a feeder in that area just to feed directly in the die cutter from some other process. So we've tried to keep it modular in its design so that you can move different pieces up and to the back of it also.
And one last thing on this layout, just to put it into perspective for people, this is approximately 40 feet long from the beginning of the feeder to the end of the conveyor. So it is quite long. In this configuration, without the feeder and the inkjet base, you're probably looking around 20 feet to 25 feet between the feeder, from the feeder of the BSR down to the end of the conveyor, the finishing conveyor.
And for those of you that are web-based people in the digital world, that feeder in the front side is a tile-fed device. You don't need to be cut sheet fed on this. We have the ability to put a sheeting line in front of this from a roll also. So many of you that are continuous forms printers already in the inkjet world, that is something we can do also. Now I think we can show the video and we can be quiet for a second.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
No problem. So this here next is a short video of our machine running currently as is. These are blank sheets that you will see. That there is going under the inkjet head through the UV light to cure it. It's tough to see, but there is numbers being printed all the way across the sheet. This application that you see right now, this is running at 7,250 sheets per hour. That there's a stream spreader device that spreads the cards out separately for the girls to catch them at the end. And then they simply just put it on a short conveyor for the girls to band at the end. They put a clear banding around each pack of cards that comes off. So to recap, we have our original process was 5 steps. We had the offset print. We quarter cut it down. It laser printed through a UV coater. It then went back to cutting, then to a high die and a band. Our new process that we do now still uses the same offset print and the same quarter cut, but now we inkjet, die cut, and band all in one pass. There's a huge savings from labor and consumables, and which allows us with our partner company for growth and reduce turnaround times on their work. So a real quick labor savings chart that we built here. The old process, and this is all in man hours, and this is based on, if you see in the upper right hand corner, on just to print 500,000 cards. So if I'm doing 30 to 35 million cards a month, you can see how quickly the savings add up. The old process, the printing alone took 18 man hours, the cutting was 10, and round cornering was 20 hours. So we had 48 hours man hours built into the old process just to print 500,000 cards. Our new process, which does the printing, cutting, and round cornering all in one shot, 17.5 total hours. That's broken down between those 5 people running that machine. So just to print 500,000 cards, we already saved 30.5 man hours. The consumable side of it now, the old process, we had the UV coating and the die sharpening. I did not put in here any sort of click charges, so that all depends on what your negotiated rate is with your laser companies. But our new process now, there is no click charges. All we have is UV ink and the die replacement, which I put in as a ratio just to go apples to apples, because to print 500 and die cut 500,000 cards, we actually do about 5 million cards before we replace the die. So I use that as a 0.1 ratio. So it's basically $550 to replace the die on our press. So the total between the two, you can obviously see the old process, $750, the new process, $67, which is a huge savings. And when we're doing roughly 2 million cards a day, that adds up a lot. All right, I think we're at the Q&A session now.
Bob, that was a very, very instructive story. I know I have some questions that I'll lead with. As I say, we do have 1 or 2 pre-submitted. I would again like to ask our audience to just do a little bit of thinking about what you've heard and ask anything. There are no inappropriate questions to ask. If you want to be nutsy-boltsy, you can ask those kinds of questions. If you want to be 30,000 feet, we welcome those kinds of questions as well. Bob, if you're printing 2 million cards a day, and if I got this correctly, if you're saving 30.5 hours in printing a batch of 500,000 cards, I can't do that arithmetic in my head, but you're saving a lot of hours every month. What have you been able to do with that manpower time saved? How have you been able to redirect it within the operation?
So the people that we've had working on it, sometimes that they're temporary employees, so they've been, you know, assigned to other locations. In some instances, we've had them able to be repurposed around the plant. So with more work and more production out of our machines, it requires more people to be working in different locations of the plant. So we sometimes move them from doing all the high-rise die cutting to now some of those girls are leads on the banding at the back end of the Bograma, or they're in our fulfillment department being leads back there. So they just simply get moved around. We don't, you know, we employ roughly 65 temporary employees here every day, and that fluctuates anywhere between 50 to 75. We use them for fulfillment and packaging and things that we do for other customers around the plant.
Allocation of that labor have been important parts of ROI on your investment in this system.
Exactly.
Bob, I'm going to try to combine a question of mine with one that has come in. My question was, what was your main criterion in selecting a rotary die cutting system? What did it absolutely have to be able to do? And the question from the audience member is, how did it compare to other brands of rotary die cutters? So, you know, what kind of comparison shopping did you do? And you know, what clinched the deal in favor of the Bograma unit that you finally chose?
I would say we shopped around with a couple different brands, you know, and the price point between each one was sometimes minute, and other times it was completely, you know, from one end of the spectrum to the other. The biggest decision making was, I think, the reputation that MBO has with their machinery. Our bindery that we have here is all MBOs. So we have 4 folders here, 4 continuous feed folders here that run 2 shifts a day, every day. And the maintenance that's done on them and the downtime that we have with them is so minute that I said, basically, if the rotary die cutter can do half of that, and be down half as much as what that is, then that's the direction that we have to go. This card production line that we have is probably the most high demand machine that we have here in our facility right now. It runs minimum 2 shifts a day, usually 6 days a week, and we had to have something that could produce the cards fast enough that would allow us more open time, because we got to a point with our customer that there was no wiggle room whatsoever. We had to produce every day. We had to hit the numbers every single day, because if we didn't, then we had to go to a third shift, or we had to work Sundays, or whatever we had to do to make sure that we got the job done. With doing this now, with this increased productivity, it gives us wiggle room to do some R&D, to work on some other accounts, and allow us to expand our rotary die cutting.
By the way, one member of the audience has sent in a question indicating that my voice is hard to hear. Moderator, your voice is barely audible. I've adjusted my volume here. I will try to speak a little bit more loudly, but if I'm still not coming across, please don't hesitate to let me know. But Bob, we have one query in 2 parts. What was the approximate capital expense cost, and how much savings did you pass on to the current customer base? Now, if you prefer not to disclose the investment price, you know, what you spent on the system, maybe you could speak, even if in general terms, of how much savings you've been able to pass on to the customer and the jobs that you're producing on this rotary die cutter.
The savings is a little bit kind of muted because it was more about productivity for them than it was about savings. Our customer has basically says, we've put our eggs in your basket. We need you to find a way to get it done. And this is our solution of finding a way to get it done. So that savings then basically goes to our bottom line. Our customer has been more than happy with us delivering every single month now for the last 4.5 years. As far as what we've paid for the machine, I don't really want to disclose, but it's a multi-part machine because you have the die cutter, which is a separate piece. Then we have the inkjet base, which is a separate piece, and then we also have the feeder, which is a separate piece. So if you kind of put all those different pieces together, I mean, you're definitely over the 1 million mark, but it all depends if you buy it as a package deal or if you don't. So we've done our due diligence. We've gained partnerships with different companies, and it has proven to be our best fit for what we do here for the card production.
Bob, we've got a couple of questions here about substrates. The first one is, what type of materials do you run in addition to the materials used in the job that you just demonstrated? Can you run polycarbonate or textured polyester? What's the range of material you can process on your rotary die cutter?
We haven't explored too much with the synthetic stocks, although we are getting into that right now. A few of the test samples that I've sent through, we've had no issue with them cutting. It does a very clean cut. We buy all of our dies currently through a company called Coker & Beck out of Kansas. They came highly recommended from MBO, and their rep has come out here, and we have actually, from the beginning, have made some changes to our dies to build them to run longer life. So original dies that were sent in were straight steel dies, laser hardened, and they did a great job, and they ended up lasting us about 2.5 to 3 million impressions. Where now what we did, one of the things that we decided to do was take those same dies and chrome plate them, and it's amazing how much they have increased their length. So the cost to chrome plate them is so minute versus the length that we get. So we were getting 2.5 to 3 million out of an old set of laser hardened dies. On the chrome plated ones now we're up about 5.5 to 6 million impressions. So again, another savings of less money spent on dies, less downtime changing out the dies. Not that it takes long to change the die out. Literally takes 5 minutes to change out a die. It's not long at all. So you simply, what we have is an upper die, a cutting die, and a lower anvil plate. So putting in a 2-part die with a counter, so if you were doing scoring or anything like that, super easy. They have line-up pins with magnetic cylinders. You line them up on the pins, the plates roll right around, they're stuck to the cylinder, and you're ready to go.
Bob,
Pat, if you'd like, I can give you a little bit of help also on the substrates and the range of papers and such for that question. We have experience running up. The machine will take up to about 19 or 20 point boards if you're in the folding carton business. The die cutter has a male and a female side to it, so the cylinders are undercut for die plates on both sides, as Bob said, and you can put a sleeve, a counter plate that's flat on there. If you're just cutting from one side, you can make it a double die plate that has scoring and embossing and perforating and so on, all embedded in both die plates, so that you end up with a multi-step cut, score, perf, all in one die station. So in that, what I mean by that is, if let's say you're doing a folding carton, you could have all the cut lines, the flap scores, and then even perf, and you could even take windows out of the middle of it too. All in one die, run through the same station, double-sided, and they're actually true, true die cut type scores. They're not the it's not just pressing a blade against a flat piece of metal. It's a true male-female score with a matrix. And we have experience down to about 60 GSM, which is a very light stock like paper. We've cut Tyvek and some other polys, cups, some plastic cards and such. As long as it fits in that range, it does very well with the cutting. Where we see the biggest issues with synthetics and plastics and polys is mostly in the fact that those products have a lot of static associated with them. So the feeder will, they'll have the product stuck together, and we have to take big steps to put in, say, deionizers or passive static removal or even active static removal on both sides of the die cut, because then it'll also affect stripping, where you could be trying to pull a plastic chip out of the middle of a card, and it'll get stuck there with static, so we have to take some extra steps to get rid of that. But cutting is usually not too much of an issue as long as you stay within that range of thickness. It's mostly handling the product is where you get into issues that we have to test. And we usually do have a machine or two here in Philadelphia area, and we'll run tests and get a pretty good feel for how that'll go in our showroom.
Lance, there was a question about your final point. Any plans or proposed method to automate the delivery? We could see at the end of the video that there's still a manual step there. Gathering, stacking, and banding the cards. What can you do at the delivery end?
Yeah. So we do have different solutions for automating the back end. Mostly in die cutting projects, and I think this has been true in our industry for a long time, feeding it, cutting it, and getting it onto some sort of a table is kind of the easy part. What to do with product coming off that fast, especially in this card environment, there's a lot of cards coming off of there. At 7,000 sheets an hour, 25 up, there's the cards coming off there it's voluminous. So we do have some stackers that will take those cards and put and deliver them into some stacks. Of course, it depends on the sizes and such that you get into. We always have a shingling type method. We actually will have a playing card type method where it can take decks of cards coming out in 2020. We'll have that available to the market. There is a robotic solution. And of course, that's something that could integrate even into maybe putting something into a tray or a box. But normally what we see is people walk and then run in these things. Sometimes we call it, crawl, walk, and run. And I think what happened here is a very good example of that. We bit it off in pieces, and actually the customer bit it off in pieces, where they worked on the printing and consolidated that piece and put it in line with one machine, and then we addressed the next bottleneck, and we gained the advantage in the ROI there. And then now we could actually move on after we see what's happening here, and maybe you could design some sort of a automated or robotic solution that would pick those cards up and place them into a banding conveyor. And most of the time that's a discussion of the capital investment, because now you truly are talking about customizing a process for a very specific application, whereas that die cutter and all the Kirk-Rudy table, the feeder they had, and the die cutter, those were all standard modules put together to do a custom application. The deliveries we are finding are usually quite specific, and they are custom usually. There's not one delivery that affects them all.
Lance, I think you may have stated this, but here's a question asking, what are the minimum and maximum thicknesses of material that this particular machine can handle?
So we go by in points. If everybody knows, points is thousandths of an inch. The cutting gap, if you're scoring and cutting on the same board for, say, a folding carton stock, it's about 19 point 19 thousandths of an inch or 20 thousandths of an inch on the very, very tight side. And then on the low side for papers, it will take paper, it will strip paper. We see no cutting issues on light stocks. There, the specification usually involves how do we strip the matrix away from the product when you start getting products that are very flimsy and light papers. And we see that stopping at about 60 or 70 pound offset paper. That becomes the bottom range of where it strips rather easily. There are usually some methods we can go maybe down to 50-pound paper and such, but usually those require some tests and maybe even something custom or special, and possibly that would be the bottom range.
Bob, again, I think you may have given this information in your part of the program, but a couple of questions have come in. What is the card material being used in the job you described? And we also are being asked, who is your primary supplier of dies?
So the paper that we use right now is a 14-point C2S. It's an SBS stock. Our customer requested that thickness, so we've been buying it in truckloads at that thickness for them. Our primary die supplier, like I said, is Coker & Beck. They're out of Kansas, and they do a phenomenal job of getting us our dies quickly and on time and never any issues. And they're the ones that actually, like I had said, suggested with chrome plating the dies to increase their longevity. And it's kind of a loss for them, but that's what good partnerships do, is they come up with better ideas to increase your efficiencies and productivity, and that's exactly what they did for us.
And here are some questions coming from kind of a different direction, but they are all about cost-efficient production. What are some suggestions for how to bill customers for die cutting? And this question is put really, I think, very, very revealingly. How do you differentiate between a large wall decal and 500 stickers that may use the same amount of material? How do you price those kinds of jobs and still make money?
I'm not sure. It all depends, I guess. It's just like quoting any other print job. It would be based on quantity and setup, and is it something that it's fit for you to do, or is it fit for maybe someone that you do other work with or you partner with for them to do? I know that we do window clings for one of our customers, and yes, we can print window clings on our HP. We can die cut them here, but for a small run, are we going to go through the whole hassle of breaking down our normal process just to print, let's say, 500 window clings, when I can pick up the phone and I can call our partner company over on the other side of the city and say, hey, I need 500 window clings. How quickly can you turn them? And they do window clings and they do POP material and stuff like that all the time. So I guess you have to kind of weigh everything out on that as far as quantities and runs, and is this something that you're going to get into and just do all the time? If that's the case, then yeah, get yourself a die made, do a die line, get a die made, and this machine will do it. I mean, it'll cut it, it'll strip it out, and it'll deliver it for you faster than you could probably imagine.
Pat, I have
yeah, go ahead.
I have a little experience in that, where it might be a little bit different workflow that we see quite a bit with these machines. What you see today is a rather, I think it's a customized type of an application where we've taken 3 or 4 processes and putting them into one line. And a lot of times that won't necessarily be exactly what many people will have. But a real common one we see would be, let's take the person that's asking about the short runs. Classically, you're going to have some sort of a short run print device. Let's say you've got a cut sheet printing box of some kind, maybe even up to a B2. That would be something like the HP 12,000 and such. So you would have that, and then right next to it would be this machine with a pile feed and no inkjet necessarily. So you're actually starting from a white sheet print, and then you could load that sheet into the die cutter and cut it out. So just a couple of numbers on that. Most importantly, and like if you're only running 500 sheets, would be how fast can you get it on, how fast can you get it off, because that's all about make ready when you're selling a job like that. So a couple of the numbers are, setting up a job to do a quick like that, if you budgeted a half an hour on, set a die, set the stripper, and run it, and if it's a repeat job, it'd be less. You're not so necessarily worried about the speed of the die right at that point in time, or speed of the cut, but if you could crank it up to 4, 5, 6, 7,000 sheets an hour, your job is off in minutes, and you're selling a make-ready at that time. But you're not selling a 2-hour or 3-hour make-ready that you traditionally would have to put up with in a flatbed environment. And I think that's where the advantages come in. Secondly, in that environment, that digital customer is probably looking for a very quality edge to it and not have nicks and other things that would be an issue in your display or an issue in the visual part of that product, especially like the door hanger tag or a presentation folder and such. So a cutter like this requires no nicks to pull the sheet through. Typically in a flatbed operation, when you make the cut, you have to leave a few nicks in around the piece to pull the matrix through, and then you either bust that off through another, like a stripping die, or you do that by hand in either case. And in this case, this machine does not need that in its process, so you gain on that backside by not only having a clean edge for the customer, but you have no labor to do that additional work. So we don't see it to be the run of one. I think there are probably laser cutting solutions that can do that, very well. It's not a presentation folder of one, but we would maintain that it's a cut of a few to, I would say, reasonably many. We have not seen this machine go into a market that is competing with a 40-inch full-size flatbed running 7,000 an hour on a 10 million run. That's not its market. This short to medium run market, especially in this we see this digital proliferation. That's where its play is.
Lance, I think you've partially answered the next question, which was actually the first one to come in, and it's a really good one. How can a small print shop running small jobs better compete with online businesses that offer several hundred cards or stickers with unique die cuts at less than half the price that small business can offer? How do we compete with the online sources when we're finishing and die cutting?
Wow, that's quite a question.
Yeah.
For us, the challenge of the small printer is always been to feed the beast. We didn't make that actually much easier in this scenario by making a machine that has a rather fast make ready, yet still can have running speeds of what you saw, 7, 8, 9,000 sheets an hour. So actually these are the types of machines that those bigger printers or the web to print type people are using, and I think the challenge that small printer has, Bob, you probably can dive into this much better than I can, but it is going to be, if you make the investments, you have to make sure that the beast that you have just purchased can be fed. Letting a machine like this sit idle because you do a general commercial type mix of work that doesn't have a stream going to this 70% of its life would definitely be a play to not have a good payback.
Yeah, I would agree. This is that whole crawl, walk, run sort of scenario. If you've got an influx of a specific kind of die cutting work, and you've been doing it the hard way now for the last 6 months, year, 10 years, whatever it may be, it's about finding a process that makes it better and more efficient with, not to put it, bluntly, but with less people. We integrated this for a couple of reasons. One, I needed more productivity. And two, I wanted less man hours to be put at it because sometimes the man hour is not reliable. So if you have people that call in sick or, then you're constantly chasing and trying to find someone else that can do that job and make sure that they're doing it right. A machine like this, it's a big investment. But if you have a lot of short-run work that you can throw a die on in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, set the job up in 20, and knock out 500 labels and sell it, good for you. There's not a lot of companies out there that can do that, and you might want to be the only one that can. But I would, that's one of those things that you got to have, like Lance said, feed the beast. You got to make sure you've got the work for it, because if that machine sits for a week or 2 weeks because you don't have the work for it, then the payment for it is that much more harsh. Our ROI on this, we knew that we had a specific amount of time that we wanted to be able to have this machine up, running, producing, and paying for itself. And our ROI with savings alone of our old process is cut even shorter. So it's something that you're just going to have to analyze with your business model and say, do I have enough work to feed the beast? If so, then I got to pursue it.
Bob and Lance, we have time for just a couple of more. I want to get as many of these in as I can. Someone has asked, how does the cost of the flexible die compare to the steel rule die? That's an important question.
So it's basically I got an answer for that, Lance. If you want, I can basically give our scenario here. So just like with steel rule dies, you're basically paying for how much rule is being used. It's very similar to the flexible dies because the flexible dies are machined, so they're taken out of one piece of steel and then it's CNC machined. So if there's more cutting and more involved, they just charge more for the die. Our dies that you see with the 25 up cards, to have them chrome plated costs around $550. So to put that into perspective, you can look at how much rule. If there's, you got more simplistic rule where you're just die cutting, let's say maybe a pocket folder, you're probably looking somewhere around $250 to $300. So that's something that you need to take into consideration for your cost for your dies.
So I'll add a little of what we experience with some of the ROI justifications on this. I believe, in general, somebody that is making a wooden die with steel rule blade in it for a flatbed, I believe the cost, the purchase point is a little bit lower than the dies we are using for the same size if you compared linear inches to linear inches. And if you're just comparing a piece of metal to a wooden die that's made generally by hand or bent and put together in shop. However, what we have found, the ROI justification that most people are using is not just to compare the consumable piece, because if you compare the make-ready time of a wooden die on a flatbed machine and you compare the make-ready time of this metal plate to hang on a rotary machine, you'll find that I know some of the numbers from some of the bigger machines. If we hung a B2 size die on a Bograma, you're looking at, on the average, especially a repeat job is under 30 minutes, and a full job, they're rarely over 45. So if you took a half an hour, 45-minute, even 30-minute, sort of an average over the life, and you compared that to putting on a flatbed, and for those of you that know the flatbed, or maybe they don't, flatbed dies, typically you have to put them on. The operator will strike them, check out how they cut on the product. Typically, since the wood's very much of an alive product, so it moves, it changes, and you'll get maybe a corner that doesn't cut just perfect. or you'll get a flat that needs to be shimmed, and they'll lift the die and they'll shim it. And then you also have to compare the fact that we are stripping on this too. So the die that you're putting on that machine is an all-in-one die. So you have to consider that piece. If you do have a stripping situation going at the end, that can add to the cost, literally the cost of using a flatbed die. And when we find customers comparing that sort of thing, it hands down will win with the rotary die because it's more of a process than it is. And I want to make a comment about how the die goes on. So on the Bograma machine is a fixed gap cutter. The distance between the cylinders is very, very, very tight. It's exactly 1.2 millimeters. And when they order the dies are actually ground by Coker and Beck to that size. So there's no striking or shimming. You hang the die, you put it on the pins, roll it around, and it's done. Even if it's a double-sided die, you hang one side on the bottom, one side on the top. They both go on register pins. You roll them around, and they're done. The only operator adjustments you would need would be the small pressure adjustments that go onto the bearer rings, which is typical in, say, the label industry and such. You know, we're not using a die that is terribly different than anything they would see out of the label market. So you can increase the bearer pressure to hold that down a little tighter if you need a little more pressure. But other than that, you're working off of a fixed space, and that's very, very different than what happens under a flatbed type of an environment. So that's at least a little bit of how we see customers, you know, comparing when you're looking at the two processes, because that is usually a question that comes up.
Well, Lance, Bob, I could go on for the rest of the afternoon, but it does look as though we're just about out of time for today. On behalf of Printing Impressions and MBO, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and I particularly want to thank our audience for keeping those great questions coming. Please do be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all of our archived and upcoming webinars. This one will be archived and available within the next couple of days if you would like to review it. Finally, if you would just take a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen next, we would be very grateful. Your feedback does help us to improve the webinars that we bring to you in the future. I hope to see you again at upcoming Printing Impressions webinars. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.